I'm not sure what all we need to do to get this system working, but Jim has a tape as well as some words he wants to share with us. And we thought it would be a good idea to get the hotel's set up. You would think it would have a remote control device. Lead motor and everything.
Windows.
I'm not sure. You want to do this first? Here, I'll give this to you.
No, listen.
Whatever order you want to do it.
We'll try for the excitement. We'll do some sort of an introduction, then we'll break and try to get this thing working. If it doesn't work, then we'll do something else in the meantime.
I'm right up front.
You're right up front.
She's revenge. That's it. She's going to pick apart everything you say.
Okay, one more draw-related thing. Usually when I come to these events, I try to dig around and see if I can find something from days past that would be interesting. Sometimes I've kicked them into the door prize draw. Sometimes I have just put them into the general raffle. On one occasion, I gave various articles of my clothing, it's true, to the people who had come the greatest distance for that particular show.
Thank you, Jim.
This time I was digging around. Things are getting very thin. I've been giving away much of my stuff. I ran across this in splendid condition. That doesn't belong in there. It's Commodore notebook. It has a Commodore keyboard on the tab here. Commodore folded papers in excellent condition and so on. I thought, what should I do with
little ball fell
this time? And I thought, well, you look at all of the people who are contributing, people who are bringing people who make wonderful presentations here and so on. I mean, who deserves it most? And I thought, well, the people that do presentations usually get applause and something like that, but one guy seems to do a lot of work and get only abuse. I didn't have to name him. He knew who he was. Dale, come on out
back here.
You volunteered.
Hey, they want your picture.
He missed a photo op.
Photo op.
Okay, what you do there?
One-handed?
We left the Commodore pen. Okay. Okay. There we go.
Hold it.
We're ready? Fly up.
Try again. Cameras?
Gosh.
Okay, fine.
Don't you feel like the president or somebody? Maybe you don't want to feel like the president these days. Anyway, what happened is, recently, a number of people seem to have gotten very interested in early Commodore history. So I get a surprising number of phone calls and email asking me for information on the early days and confirming things on the early days, and I've ended up making a couple of presentations on that. But quite to my surprise, about a month ago in Toronto, which is where I live, I got a call from the PC user group saying, could you come and do a presentation? And I said, I don't really do much on PCs. I'm kind of on another product line. And they said, well, come anyway. And I said, well, okay, but I'm not sure what you expect. After I talked to the guy a little bit, it turns out he was short of speakers, but I tried to ignore that a little bit and said, well, I can do some of this old history stuff that I've been called to do recently, if you like that. And he said, he said, I know what I want. Our club has just bought a new projector, and didn't you do a TV series many years ago? And I said, yes, I did. And the guy said, could you bring in some tapes of your old TV series? And I said, I don't really think you want that, because first of all, there are 12 half-hour programs, and I don't know your membership, but I don't think they would want to sit still for 6 hours. Oh, well, he said, we'd like to see that. Now, I remember some of the people who won that program besides yourself, and I said, well, I'll see what I can do. So I went down to the archives and I dug out some old tape. I pulled out some excerpt, and it is a bit of a blast from the past, although it doesn't favor Commodore that strongly. But it's interesting to look at some of the characters. What happened was about 23 years ago, I was suddenly bombed in on by a couple of television writers who said, we're going to write an educational series on microcomputers, and here is our first draft, and what do you think of it? So I sat down and I corrected what I viewed as technical errors and so on, and they came back and I said, well, these are the things that I think need correcting. And they said, yeah, well, what do you think of it? And I said, you want my opinion on what you've written? Oh, yeah. I said, I think it's terrible. I said, it is dry as dust. It is somebody lecturing about bits and bytes and logic and various things. I said, look what's happening. People are having fun. People are having a good time on their computer. I said, you should do something to reflect that. You should do something to reflect the confusion. Now, the first thing I would do is to have a guy walk up to a computer and spend 5 minutes looking for the on-off key. On-off key. Because that happens to all of us. And they said, oh, well, we better go back and rewrite this. We hadn't thought of that. No, I was kind of amazed. I thought they'd say, huh, what does he know? And so, no, they went back and they scrapped their original draft and came back and said, what do you think of this one? Well, it was better. And they started on a television series. It was still, it's educational, what can you say? It still wasn't really sparkling and witty, but what they did, and probably due to my influence, is when they started hiring for this fairly big production they were doing there, was instead of hiring sort of conventional performers, they went out and hired comedy performers. People who were quite well known in Canada, you probably wouldn't know them here, but people like Lou Godoy and Billy Van, who are quite well known names in Canadian comedy. So that was fine, and they started doing that, and a big production like this, he contracted out for animations and various other things, and by the time they had put all of this together, it took maybe a year and a half to produce this series, which of course guaranteed it was a little out of date before it ever broadcast. But as it did approach the broadcast time, I got another call from TV Ontario saying, well, these are half-hour programs, and we need some way of filling in another half hour on a local basis, but not on our big production basis, just something to fill an extra half hour. And we were wondering if you'd come in and do a supporting program there. So I said, sure. What does it pay? And they said, well, you have to join the union. So I said, oh, it pays good, that's fine. So as a result, I ended up with a series of 12 programs on television there, but we're talking now 22 years back, about 1963. And because of the nature of the program, of course, I wasn't allowed to touch only Commodores. I actually had to associate with other machines because we were dealing with the subject generally. Most of the other machines are long gone, but some of you might remember that far back. Now, in a moment, we'll see if we can get this going. I have pulled some very short clips from both the original big budget production to show you a bit what it was about, and then secondly, some very short clips from the program in which, the following program in which I was involved. So, why don't we see if we can crank this thing up? While we have these busy little beamers, see, this is a combination VCR and DVD machine. Now, the tricky part there is, when you have these combination machines, they want to do DVDs. They don't like to do VCRs. And without a remote control, we may have trouble persuading it to do what we want. We have to turn various things on. Well, I'll leave Dale with that.
You got to turn it back on. This has got to be on first.
What's got to be on first?
The TV set.
Don't you love to see these busy beavers?
Then do AV input 1.
There you go.
Would you like to, once we get going, yeah, okay, there's the play. Would you like to hang near rewind.
Whoa.
Let's take it all the way back.
The hell with rewinding, go fast forward.
Well, yeah, there's that too. That seems to be the end of that. That's the end.
The hair.
Especially styled. What can I tell you?
Was it screen
Rewind.
actor skills? Are you SAG?
Yeah.
In Canada?
Oh, it's Canada. Okay.
It's Canada. Don't know if they have SAG in Canada. Screen actors guild. Ooh, the hero. Yes, a hero robot.
What year was this?
1925, I think.
Television wasn't around in 1925.
Well, depends on your definition. No, 1983. 1983 was first broadcast of this. Can you stay near the pause button?
Here, we can pause.
There are clips. Not yet, but I'll tell you.
Who's that man behind the curtain?
Yes, do we have sound?
It's the Wizard of Oz. Pay attention to that man behind the curtain.
Electronics Limited. Digital Equipment of Canada Limited.
Hey.
Nabo Manufacturing Corporation. And the following companies.
Apple Canada.
I don't see a pause.
Close the door now.
Okay.
Funny, the Commodore didn't.
They have a theme song.
Close the
Wow.
door down.
Wow. Wow.
Sing with us.
What a wimpy song.
Hello, welcome to Synthesizer.
Lubagon.
In this episode, we're going to see how the computer not only lets you play music, but play with music in all sorts of new ways. And you don't need to be musical to do this. If you have a bad ear for music, the computer can help train your ear. If you can't read music, the computer can help you to learn. Or if you like, it can create a new way of representing musical notes.
Surely I need to plug in a whole lot of extra equipment if I want to make music on my computer.
Not necessarily.
Don't call me Shirley.
It's true that as you progress, you can invest in extra equipment, but you can have a lot of fun with music just with your basic microcomputer. Because when you buy a computer, you're also buying a musical instrument. There's already a program loaded into the Atari that does just that. Yes. This type of program exists for all the computers. Of course, you can also keep a copy of the tune you play on the disc and play it back later if you want. To see how to do this, press the escape key.
Type U to save memory data.
And when you're tired of playing the piano, you can switch to the organ.
Keyboard, organ.
It's the program that'll turn your computer keyboard into an organ keyboard.
Okay.
You'll need to take out the basic ROM pack to use this one.
Wow. Yes. Yes. Huh? Okay. Poor. Poor.
A little short on the tax-sustained delivery.
I'm sorry, I wanted to comment. When I go to church, that's what I hope to hear.
Is there any way I can play several notes simultaneously for harmony and chords?
Yes, there is. some of these popular micros have a special music chip built in that gives you what are called different voices.
You mean that'll talk to me?
No, voices in this case just means the number of notes that the computer can play at the same time. The Atari actually has 4 musical voices, and the Texas Instruments has 3. So does the Commodore 20.
And the other computers?
With the others, you have to buy a certain amount of extra hardware if you want more than one voice.
Okay, hold it there for a moment. Yeah, you can see that it still isn't really fast-paced and bright.
I'm sorry, I did press stop, but I guess, no, I didn't. Sorry.
Well, I don't know about you. May have to move somebody else in. Yeah, okay, generally speaking, these people are much brighter when they have some real comedy scripts to work with, which is not necessarily what you've seen there. I did want to show you, however, that here they did have some fairly big budget operations, such as animation sequences. Those cost a pretty fair piece of money. If you watch this next one, you'll probably learn all about how vibrations make music. Golly!
In order to explain that, we need to explain what goes on inside the computer that enables it to make a sound in the first place.
When you take a tuning fork and do this, the prong of the fork vibrates and sets up a sound wave. And when this sound wave hits your eardrum, you can hear the note that is being played by the tuning fork. Now, it's easy enough to understand how tuning forks make sounds because you can see the vibrations. But how do computers make sounds? They don't. They can make other things vibrate. Every time a computer circuit switches on or off, there is a tiny increase or decrease in electric current. It's like a miniature heartbeat that sends out a miniature electrical pulse. This pulse is much too weak to generate any sound on its own, but it can be fed into a tiny device called a transducer to produce a tiny sound. But if we want a louder sound, we must first make the pulse larger. We must amplify. And this is simple to do because our computer monitor or TV set comes already equipped with an amplifier. If we feed the computer's pulse into this amplifier, it will be made large enough to cause a loudspeaker to vibrate, and therefore create a sound wave that we can hear. So, provided that your computer is hooked into an amplifier and a loudspeaker, simply by turning a circuit on or off, you will be able to make a blip sound. Of course, this blip can hardly be called music, but if you tell the computer to switch a circuit on and off more and more rapidly, it will produce a faster and faster string of blips, and eventually you will hear a musical note. The more frequent the blips, the higher the note, and the less frequent the blips, the lower the note, which is why the highness or lowness of a note is called its frequency. For example, if we get the computer to turn a circuit on and off precisely 440 times a second, we will hear 440 blips per second, which happens to be the frequency of the musical note A. And this is exactly how a tuning fork, or a piano, or a guitar, or a trumpet also produces the musical note A, or any other note for that matter. It's all based on vibrations. So your computer can not only give you good words, and good numbers, and good pictures, it can also give you good vibrations.
Wow. Good vibes. I like that. So a frequency of 440 means that there are 440 vibrations per second?
That's right.
And if all the computers can make electronic vibrations, does that mean that all computers can produce sounds?
Yes, provided that they are connected to some sound-making device, such as a transducer for tiny sounds, or to an amplifier and a loudspeaker for louder sounds.
Okay. Stop it.
Yes.
High mixes
Now
make
you can
sense?
see what exciting stuff the school children of Ontario were watching 22 years ago.
Explains a lot. It's not any worse than National Geographic shows, I'll tell you that.
Well, back in those days, of course, people would just scramble to get whatever they could because most people had never heard of what any of this was about. So anything was better than nothing, and there was some effort went into this thing. So, be a little more, and in fact, this doesn't really give much credit to Luba Guy, who did much better with a kerchief over her head, being a Jewish mother or some other sort of thing, saying, "What are you doing with that button? Now don't push that one." But they didn't feel that they could do the script quite that way. They still had to be a little bit serious. We can move along through the end of this series and the closing credits. There's a little more material, but we can move fairly quickly along and get to the second show, which was low budget by comparison, and it's the one where I spent time on camera. So you want to play, and then you can hit fast forward if you like. We're talking about speech synthesis in this area.
Ooh.
And it's signing off now, so you can just move it back to play. And we'll come on to, very shortly, we'll come on to the second program where I did have a participation. It was amazing how excited the PC group got over some of this old stuff. I remember that. Takes you right back to some of this nostalgia stuff. So I ended up doing, after each one of these shows, a half an hour on camera.
Welcome again to the Academy on Computers. This time, computer music and speech. We'll be looking at some new technological developments and exploring the making of computer music with 3 studio guests. To get us started on the right note, our resident expert, Jim Butterfield. Jim.
Must be your younger brother.
In the area of speech, because that fascinates me even more than computer music. What can you tell me about computer speech?
Okay, well, this is called speech synthesis.
And that's easy
And
for me to say.
in order to make the computer talk, we have to make up the same sort of electronic vibrations as we do when we're making music, but they follow a somewhat different style. Most computers are capable of performing speech, but they need extra hardware added. It's usually not built in. And so we have devices called speech synthesizers. I have one here, for example. This is a speech synthesizer which receives its input on the connection from the computer. The words and information to be spoken come in on this connector on the side, and then this is processed in there. The information is recognized, and the sound signals end up as speech coming out of the machine.
Right, but how does it generate the speech?
Well, there are 2 basic methods. One is called the word recognition principle, and that means we can send full words with their usual horrible English spelling down to the synthesizer, and it will recognize them, decode them, and speak the correct word. And the other one is called phonemes, in which we break down each word into its individual sound components, and we send these sound components down to the speech synthesizer.
Which is the most common method of those 2?
Well, the most common one is the word recognition. This is much easier because then you can send down words from a document and you don't have to translate them into phonemes. It will all happen in here. This, for example, is the Texas Instruments speech synthesizer. It has a vocabulary of about 300 words. Now, that doesn't sound like very much, but that's a fair amount of unusual spellings of words, and the rest it can usually make up by other systems of putting the various letters together and more or less electronically guessing how to speak it.
How would I know which words were programmed in?
Well, usually you'll find that in the instruction manual. What you have to do is to take a look in the book, and it will say, here are the words we have, and here are the ones that don't exist here. So you have an example of the speech synthesizer in action. What I've done is I've typed in the first line of a well-known poem. The sun was shining on the sea, shining with all its might. Now, I've typed that in with this normal English spelling, and when I press the Enter key to put it into the computer, it will be transmitted to the speech synthesizer, and it will say it. Here we go.
The sun was shining on the sea, shining with all its might.
It's Stephen Hawking!
Recognizes spelling. M-I-G-H-T is a rather unusual spelling when you think about it, and if we simply had an idiot piece of electronics that didn't understand about recognizing these words out of a vocabulary, then it might say the individual letters and end up saying something like megahertz.
Oh.
Stop.
Huh?
Okay, isn't it interesting to know that in 22 years we haven't really done much with speech synthesis? For a while they were talking about greatly improving the Amiga speech synthesis. But why is it that speech synthesis is such a difficult phrase to try saying that with a mouthful of crackers? See how far you get. The next little bit, which is the last piece I'm going to show, demonstrates the Heath Hero robot. I want you to notice particularly the seat on which Jack is sitting. There's a little story to be attached to that in a moment. Once again, the Heath doesn't perform very well, but since it's not around anymore, you might like to see what it was like back in those days. Let's roll it.
Effective speech synthesis I'd like to show you, and that is it's entering into the realm of robotics. I have something here for you to see, Jack.
Yeah, hero.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Ed. Happy birthday to you.
Well, you got your name right. How did he know it was your birthday?
Well, I actually programmed it, and I hope perhaps he'd bake me a cake.
You going to introduce me to your friend?
Yes, I'd like to introduce you. Hero, this is Jack Lisley. Jack, this is the Hero 1, the Heath Company's new robotics training computer.
Hello, Hero. Can he understand what I say or hear what I say?
Well, not really, Jack, but I think we can try an experiment here. Here's a script. We have to pre-program this in. And now let me see if I can set this up.
What are you doing here?
Oh, okay. What's happening here is that this contains a microprocessor. It's still a micro, like any other computer we've looked at, because it has many more interfaces, more arms and legs and wheels and things and so on. But what I'm doing is I'm typing in the address of the next program I wanted to do, which is a little straight line for a joke that you have to tell there.
A little riddle here, all right? Hero, my grandfather drove a stagecoach that didn't have any wheels.
Note Jack's little seat.
What? Held it up.
Bandits.
What held it up? Bandits.
How do you like that, Jim? Laughs at my joke.
It's nice you can find something else, but Jack, I hate to tell you this. He didn't understand a word you said. He has no speech recognition. He can hear sound, but he doesn't know what you're saying. I think I can demonstrate that by calling in. Yes, let's see what we can do here. We have a microphone in here that will recognize 2430 is the code, 24E0. And now in a moment I'll ask it to recognize sounds, and we'll try rapping on the case of the computer, see if it can count the number of times we hit. Now, the microphone isn't terribly accurate. I'm not sure how this will work out, but here we go.
Cool.
3.
One more.
5.
Okay, as long as you don't say the answer quite
Wow.
Well, it uses basically the same techniques. But one of the interesting things that it does here is it combines some of the principles of pitch used in music and phonemes used in conventional speech synthesis in order to be able to do things like sing, which is rather unusual with most computers.
Is this, what we might call an industrial robot?
No, I wouldn't call it an industrial robot. What we have here, Jack, is a machine that doesn't have the strength. Most robots used in industry anyway tend to be bolted to the floor, tend to be very, very big things. They can pick up huge weights. This is just a little training robot for educational purposes.
Jim, what else can it do?
Well, let me show you some of the components here, Jack. If we turn it around, you can see on the front here's a sonar system which can tell the distance of objects by sending out brief sounds and recognizing how long it takes for the echo to come back. Here we have, for example, a light sensor, and we know that the speaker is on the inside of the head, and so, of course, is a microphone that detects sounds. Here, of course, we have the arm that will manipulate objects that will move up and down.
The arm can manipulate objects.
Yes, I think we can demonstrate that. It'll take a while to get this one in motion, but I think you'll see the arm.
You mentioned the speaker. The voice is a low one, a male voice. That's why it's called the Hero, right?
Yes, they found that speech was more easily recognizable with a low-pitched voice, and so that's why we call Hero him all the time. It has a low voice.
Oh, it's coming over to see me. Maybe you'd like to take the script?
I think
finish
maybe
off the show.
Opening time. Okay, wait till it closes its jaws there. There we go.
Yep, he's got the script, Jim. We ain't got nothing else to say.
Well, there's nothing for you to say, Jack, if you don't have the script.
Will be best place on service and service.
Wow. Wow.
An interesting thing happened when we were setting up for that particular sequence. The way you do this on a Heath robot is you have a thing called a training pendant. You plug it in and you tell it to record and you walk it through its paces with the various movements, turns, and so on. And when it's finished, it's sort of in record mode. You shut it down, take it back to where it started, and you tell it to go through from whatever address this has been stored, just every hex address they do it, and it does it. Now, you did notice that Jack was on a tiny little flimsy chair, just sitting down like this. The hero, of course, is only about that high, very small. And you do remember what the hero was doing is it waved its arm and it opened its claw, and then it turned towards Jack and it moved towards Jack. Now, Jack would not believe this, but when you set these things up, particularly on a carpeted surface, there is some slippage.
Yeah.
And it does not always travel the original distance that you set up. So, during rehearsals, here was Jack sitting on his little chair. The hero drops his arm, opens his claw, and it moves in. And it doesn't stop.
Gosh. Oh, gosh.
Jack went over to the chair. I tried to tell him that the power of the hero's manipulator was such that he could have not gotten anything more than a friendly nudge. I think Jack still believes to this day that I did it to him. Innocence. This is what we were doing 22 years ago. Some parts of it hardly seem to have changed at all. Some parts of it have changed greatly. In some ways, the fun has gone out of it in that time. But it's interesting to look back, see the variety of machines and other things that were going on there. As a side issue, and this depends if there's time and opportunity for others, we don't need to do it now. Shortly after I did that series, I got a call from a California firm that wanted me to make a instructional tape on the Commodore 64, and so I went down there and spent a week doing an instructional tape, and that's strictly on the 64, and so you will not see all of these other foreign machines like Ataris and Heroes and so on. If anybody's interested, we can let a copy of that tape run, but I'm certainly not going to sit here and run it now. I doubt that there's much about the Commodore 64 on there that you wouldn't know today many times better. But at least I did get a chance to do that. It was a very small outfit in California. It turns out it was really a religious video production house. I wasn't quite sure how I got mixed up in that, but they didn't really want me to add any religious content. I just went through sort of the basic sequence in there, but I was a little taken aback. The week was up, and I went to check out of the Holiday Inn. They said, the credit card that the video house left has insufficient funds. So could you pay for your own room, please? So I did that, and they reimbursed me for that eventually, but it comes as a shock to see things done on that thing. As I said, I'll leave the tape around. In fact, I think I've made copies of that particular tape available to the club on earlier occasions. If anybody wants to look for part of it, I can leave it around, and I suspect this setup will be sitting here for a little while yet. You can watch it if you want. Now, that's basically what I did when I was requested. I see it's 7:45 now. I don't necessarily have to stop, however. I'd like to talk a little bit about this increased interest in Commodore history. I have been using my consultant, Jim Brain, on some of the trivia points here. His trivia questions have dug out a lot of material there. But I find a guy in Germany who's thinking of writing a book on Commodore's history. He really figures that Michael Tomchuk's The Home Computer Wars is practically the authoritative source of material on Commodore. And others of us have our doubts about that. Somehow, Tomchuk always seemed to be the hero of all of his stories. That didn't quite fit what I remembered of some of the events back then. Then again, there's a guy in central Canada, Manitoba, who's working on some more biographies. We have some more biographies.
Brian
here.
Bagnall?
Brian Bagnall, and the interesting thing about that is that Brian, to my surprise, seems to have established contact with Chuck Peddle.
Oh, yeah.
Which amazes me because nobody knew where Chuck was. He'd been talking to Peddle. I think he'd been in touch with Tramiel. And this means he's tapping some very, very good sources that have not been available to us lately. So it'll be interesting to see the material that comes out. Even now, I tend to cross-check with Jim Brain certain things. There was an interesting tandem series that I never really viewed before until we started looking into this stuff. And it worked something like this. The Apple I existed before any of the fully manufactured computers. The Apple I was a bunch of components in a plastic bag with a board you could mount it on, and you built it yourself. So it didn't really count among home computers, but Wozniak was thinking of producing the Apple II at some stage of the game. And there has been talk about which came first. Was it the Apple II, or was it the Commodore PET, or was it the Radio Shack, TRS-80? And the sequence seems to be more clear now, and there seems to be much more detail on that. And Commodore was certainly the first, although not the first in significant sales. But they certainly had prototypes out and demonstrating before anybody else. However, the sequence is still very interesting. I discover, and not all of this is confirmed yet, but it appears that Commodore had the idea, as I thought a personal computer would be a good idea, and the first thing they did is they started talking about buying Apple Computer. And one of the potential plans, and there's some support for this, that Commodore were going to make a home computer by buying Apple and finishing up the Apple II and doing it that way. And Chuck Peddle went to see the Apple II in prototype, or perhaps he talked to Wozniak about what Wozniak had in mind, and decided he could make a less expensive machine. So Commodore looked at the Apple II before they started building their PET. But the story doesn't end there. It's a little bit like a domino effect. Commodore knew how to make them, but they didn't have any retail outlets. So they said, who would be a good organization to sell this product for us? And they said, Radio Shack. And so they contacted people in Radio Shack and said, we have this hot new idea. We have a prototype of a thing called the PET, and we think it'd be a wonderful thing for you to sell. Radio Shack came and looked at it, and they decided they could build something that suited them better. So you have this endless chain of people looking at the previous concept and deciding they would build their own. And so eventually, we ended up with the Apple II, the Commodore PET originally, and the TRS-80. And the Commodore line looks like in many ways it prevailed more than any of the others. Certainly it had a much better price performance. Certainly it seems to have, even now, a lot of loyal users in that area. And they'll be interested. In fact, I have been sending comments to Brian Bagnall about some of the things that he's been talking about here. Sometimes he doesn't have, I think, the technical concepts right. And sometimes he knows the facts, but he doesn't know what the facts mean. He was saying, for example, well, the GPIB, the Hewlett-Packard Interface Bus, the IEEE 488, whatever you call it, Chuck Peddle put that on the PET so he wouldn't have to build a disk interface. And I thought, no, that's a whole different thing. What he did when he said the disks and the printers are going to go on this new interface is he committed himself at that time to building intelligent peripherals. Everybody else, you just wired them into a controller and you made the computer do all the work. Only Commodore built peripherals that had their own processors and did their own thinking. And that was a remarkable and a very significant step. It took the rest of the computer industry a long time to catch up with. Similarly, this whole business of the screen editing, Commodore took its data from the screen, not from the keyboard. You type on the keyboard, it goes to the screen, then they take it from the screen. So you change the screen, you change what the computer will do. And so on. Again, that was a Commodore innovation. Nobody else did that. In some ways, I don't think Brian quite understands how brilliant some of the concepts were behind the original Commodore thing. Things that continue onward. Eventually, the serial bus replaced the IEEE 488 bus, and so on. But many of the ideas, the intelligent peripherals, the screen editing, stayed with the machine over its life. And that's pretty good stuff. I think most of us have got to know it and like it. The other stuff just seems awkward, just seems like it wasn't thought through quite as well. So it's interesting to look back at some of the beginnings and look at some of the things that shaped the kind of machines that we lived with for a long time. Kind of machines that eventually led to today's big computer manufacturers copying. Our IEEE bus became the serial bus, and eventually there's a thing called the Universal Serial Bus, the USB. Came really from the same origin, but it was a long time coming for anybody else. Not to say that they're not different things, they have different performance. But Commodore was often there with the idea first. Intelligent devices hooking up to your computer, we see more and more of those. And generally, Commodore was there first. Okay? But we can feel pretty good that we had a machine whose concepts were far ahead of everybody else. And the reason why we bought Commodores, of course, was not because they were more economic than the other machines. We just thought they were a better concept. Right?
Right.
Okay. Good. I think that probably uses up all my time. Thanks for coming.
Yay.
This is a power supply that William Kennedy's estate has given to our club, and we're raffling it off today. We want to remember him. He was a man who worked for a pipe company, and he would program machines to help cut the pipe and so forth the way they wanted it made. And so he had some programming experience before he retired, and when he retired they gave him a Commodore 128, a whole system. And he continued to use that, master it, and continue to improve. At the time of his death, he was working with me to be able to print out, 16 million color JPEGs, so that he could print out pictures of his friends and his family and so forth from his Commodore. And I just think that he was a wonderful guy, someone who used Commodore as a way of keeping his brain sharp and continuing to keep his mind alert and solve problems the way he had in the years that he worked prior to that. So anyway, I'll just leave this here. We'll have a drawing now for the winner of the Super Power Supply.
Here we go.
Bill Shady. All right. Well, actually, we ought to empty the tickets out first, probably.
Thank you. There you go.
All right. And for the grand prize, a Super CPU 128.
Oh, a lot of people put tickets in for this one. Oh, there you go.
Steve Grassman. Steve, congratulations. We will congratulate you as our grand prize winner.
Hold that. Just a second.